Today I will be talking about plant physiology, and I'll be talking about the physiology with regards to the plant that I selected for part one of this project, which was the aspen tree. And I'll talk about how water moves throughout the tree and how the tree kind of receives its water. And then I'll also be talking about the changes the tree experiences in sugar concentrations that allow the tree to know when it is supposed to go to bloom and to be able to reproduce. So I'll start by looking at this first flow chart, which kind of examines the water aspects of the tree. So we'll start up here in the top left with precipitation. This is kind of where all plant life receives its water. We start with precipitation coming down, then that get into rivers. Somehow it's going to come down and infiltrate through the soil and kind of collect down here in some sort of aquifer where the groundwater is stored, and that will be what the tree uses to eventually nourish itself with water. And the way that it does that is through its root hairs. It does something, experiences capillary action where essentially the tree has a lower concentration of water in the top part of the tree. So what's going to happen is there's low concentration of water up here and high concentration of water down here. So it wants to balance itself out. So it kind of creates kind of a suction device that is going to flow up through the tree through the xylem, which is surrounded on either side by cell walls. And there's no, this is passive transport. So the only thing acting on this water as it's being sucked up is the difference in potential. So just the fact that there's lower concentration of water up here is going to be what allows the water to come up through the tree. And then once the water is kind of stored in these leaves and there's an equal balance of water throughout the tree, there's these things in the leaves called stomata, which are basically just like little pores that are openings. And when the stomata open, water vapor is allowed to be released from these leaves and actually evaporates up into the atmosphere. This is one part of transpiration. The other part of transpiration is while the stomata are open, it allows gases like CO2 and oxygen to enter into the plant. And these gases are used during photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And then one last point here is that to kind of complete the cycle to see how consumers are tied into the distribution of water, animals can get water basically from just eating the plant or the food source, the fruits that come from the plant, and that's how they can get water. So now we're going to look at the change in sugar that lets the plant know when it is supposed to bloom. So this starts out with the process of photosynthesis. Using that CO2 and H2O that was brought in during transpiration, the cell is able to undergo photosynthesis using light energy. The next step in that process, is the formation of sucrose, which the cell basically uses its glucose and other enzymes in order to create sucrose, which is going to be the main signal for the plant to start the reproductive process. So once the plant has converted glucose to sucrose, it's going to keep producing that until there's a very high concentration of sucrose in the shoot apical meristem, which would basically be at the top or the apex of whatever plant we're talking about. In this case, it's the aspen tree. And then once the apical meristem becomes highly concentrated with sucrose, that's going to signal to the plant that that meristem will actually become the floral meristem, which is where the reproductive parts of the plant are going to grow out of. And in the case of the aspen tree, which is the tree that I was looking at, that's when it forms what's called catkins. Each plant is a male or a female. It doesn't produce both male and female reproductive parts. So it's basically like little, it almost looks like cotton. It's little pieces of pollen from the catkins that will be able to pollinate other trees. And then after we experience that high concentration, you're going to see decreased concentrations of sucrose throughout the plant. And then lastly, it's going to actually form those catkins that I was talking about, the aspen tree or in other plants. It's going to form their flowers for their reproductive parts.